Donald J. Trump, Amina, please let me know when we are live. Hey, YouTube, how you doing? Good morning. I hope everybody is well. Welcome to the Lurie Daniel Favors Show on SiriusXM's Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. We are going to be talking today about fakery and foolery and Donald Trump's fake wars. It feels like to me like there's a lot of fake war stuff happening right now. And I want to start by reminding all of you about a caller that we had earlier this week. Now, YouTube, you guys didn't get a chance to hear this, but Urban View, you guys may remember when we had a caller by the name of Brent who called in to basically say that, we were talking about fake news. And he was talking about the fact that, Donald Trump was now suing the BBC for a story that wasn't real. And he was taking me to task, or tried to anyway, to take me to task to talk about the fact that we were talking about fake news. And so I had to remind him that Fox News was one of the many outlets that had, on the right wing, that had been charged and tried and basically found liable to the tune of almost $1 billion for basically lying about stolen elections. I reminded him about Alex Jones, who was also forced to pay almost $1 billion because he lied about the Sandy Hook situation. And there is this history on the right wing of using fake information to get what it is that they want. And I had mentioned to all of you earlier maybe it was last week. It might have even been last week. But I'd mentioned to all of you that there was a story that I hadn't gotten a chance to cover a whole lot about the fact that Donald Trump was watching fake news when he made his decision to send federal troops into Portland, Oregon, despite the fact that the governor of Oregon didn't want those troops, despite the fact that the mayor of Portland didn't want those troops. And then lo and behold, one of my favorite white-owned media outlets, ProPublica, reports on this very story in an article coming out this week. Now, what we know is that I had asked a question. I was like, can Portland sue the Fox News media outlet for false information, for defamation? And I sort of said it tongue-in-cheek. Well, guess what the opening line of an article in the New Republic is about this very topic? Can Portland, Oregon sue Fox News for defamation? That's weird. You never know who's listening. That's weird. But basically, we learned that there is a report from ProPublica that basically learned that for months before Donald Trump made a decision to send troops into Portland, Oregon, he was watching fake news, Fox News, but fake news. And basically, ProPublica confirmed, oh my gosh, Amina, can you get the song? Actually, don't play the song because it's going to mess me up on YouTube for copyright. YouTube, I have this thing where if I have a frog in my throat, Amina plays, let me clear my throat, but we're just gonna have to work through it. Y'all gonna have to hear the frog in my throat because I'm losing my voice. But basically, earlier we learned that Donald Trump, when he was watching the news channel, Fox News was airing fake information. Not fake information because these things had never happened, but they were taking old media footage from protests in like 2020, around the George Floyd era of protests, and were using that as if it were happening right now. Now, a lot of us suspected this was happening, but it has now been confirmed that Fox News, quote, claimed old footage from protests following the murder of George Floyd in 2020 had just been shot in Portland while reporting on resistance to Trump's administration immigration crackdown. On September the 4th, the day before Donald Trump makes his announcement that he is sending federal troops into Oregon, we saw that on Fox News there was a segment about protests outside of an ICE detention facility. But the network was using, quote, multiple clips from July 2020 showing law enforcement clashing with protesters outside a federal courthouse. The segment also included footage of a protester burning an American flag. Do you guys remember how Donald Trump was on this weird, if people are burning American flags, they're going to be prosecuted? I think he even issued an executive order about being able to prosecute people who were burning American flags, to which all the lawyers was like, you can't prosecute nobody for burning an American flag. That's First Amendment speech. And then Pam Bondi was talking about it. Pam Bondi, the dumbass attorney general, and her sidekick, Kash Patel, and their sidekick, Kristi Noem, who's in charge of the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, respectively. And then Pam Bondi began talking about the fact that protesters are attacking our agents. They're attacking ICE. This is unacceptable. We're going to defend our ICE agents to the fullest extent of the law. Well, wouldn't you know that part of the footage they were covering or that they were showing was also chaos protests, which were depicting protesters from 2020 clashing with police. Donald Trump is watching this and then making pronouncements about it. And Pamela Bondi, Kash Patel, and Kristi Noem then issue orders for militarized operations in response to Donald Trump's response to the fake news that Fox News was promulgating as if it were true. I promise promise y'all, y'all might be thinking I'm hyperbolic. I just be right. Hi, Brent. That one was just for you. But this matters a lot, and I spend a lot more time going over this in the podcast, which will be out later on today. Again, the podcast is called Lurie Breaks It Down, and I really appreciate all of you who have been sharing the podcast episodes. But what I talk about in the podcast is that this isn't just something that the media is reporting on. Senators like Senator Jeff Merkley also reported on this very thing happening because he was an eyewitness. Now, he's a senator, an elected official. He was an eyewitness to a very similar thing where the news media was concocting a fake protest for the purposes of convincing their audience, which includes MAGA and y'all's president, that what was happening was so urgent that the troops needed to be sent to Portland, Oregon. I'm going to share my screen so all of you can see Senator Merkley in his own words. Amina, please play the clip.
And what happened in Portland a few nights ago, and it's recorded by Oregon Public Broadcasting, was that they staged a fake riot. They marched peaceful protesters 3 blocks and then had a line across the road. They had professional videographers behind them, and then they threw down pepper balls, flashbangs, which sound like gunfire going off, and tear gas. And of course, when you put tear gas, everybody moves, and it looks like you have some kind of a riot going on. Totally fake. This is the first time I know of, at least in my lifetime, that the federal government has faked a riot in order to try to justify, if you will, the Insurrection Act being invoked.
Now, it might be the first time that he, as a white man, has heard of the media faking shit, but I'm black, and I've been black my whole life. And so what I do know is the media will indeed fake things to manufacture stories. But what we are being led to understand is that when Fox News, and I do not believe that Fox News is just doing this on their own. I'm sorry, I might have been born at night. I was damn sure not born last night. I personally, and I cannot prove this, these are not factual statements, this is my opinion, I personally believe there's a whole lot of collusion happening, because why would it be that Fox News would choose to show this old footage? You're a news outlet, supposedly. Why would you be manufacturing a story about protests that are not actually happening in the way that you're saying they're happening, unless you wanted some particular result? It just so happens the result that you wanted might have been the president deciding to follow through with his orders. Maybe that was something you wanted. Maybe it was something they requested to give the president justification to send in these troops. But Kristi Noem and Pamela Bondi and Kash Patel, y'all are a part of the intellectual. No, not intellectual. That's definitely not the right word. The secret information society. Y'all are a part of the intel of the nation. You should know what is happening because you're supposed to be clear about what's happening. You're not supposed to be led around by somebody whose brain is clearly melting into a pit of dementia, the likes of which I have never seen displayed on public TV. And so we got to ask ourselves, why would they do that? And what does it mean to have created a pretense, an understanding where we are now clear about the facts as they happen? You aired fake news. You aired fake information showing protests that were not happening, that had happened years ago. You got a result where the president is now making the statements and declarations, and then people in positions of power who control the militarized operations of this nation are then acting on that fake information and the fake outrage that came from it. Now, you might be thinking that this is much ado about nothing. I'm going to connect some dots for you. Just give me a second. Let's talk about Stephen A. Smith. Sassy. Let's talk about sassy. Actually, before we talk about sass, Stephen A. Smith, you guys remember when Minister Louis Farrakhan was on a video interview with correspondent Mike Wallace, and Mike Wallace was saying a whole bunch of bullshit. Like, Mike Wallace was using the typical white man talking points, and he did not realize that he was speaking with someone with a superior level of intelligence. And at one point, Minister Farrakhan looks at him and says, "Oh, Mr. Wallace, you should be quiet. You should hush." And so whenever I hear someone like the clip I'm about to share with you right now, I often invoke that energy from Minister Louis Farrakhan. "Oh, Mr. Wallace, you should be quiet." Now, this is about the Epstein files. And we're going to, this again, fake wars is the topic, so stick with me. And I do more of this in the podcast, but take a listen. Stephen A. Smith has pulled a Charlemagne, and he's basically now blaming the Democrats for the release of the Epstein files. I want you all to take a listen to this clip. This is Stephen A. Smith. He is talking about the Epstein files as if he knows what happens, as if he has factual understanding and he's grasping the information correctly. He is not, but I want you to hear him in his own words so y'all don't say I'm being hyperbolic. I just be correct. Listen to Stephen A. Smith. Amina, if you could please roll the clip.
Ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind that the Epstein files were in existence and free to have been open during the Biden administration.
That's not true.
You were there for 4 years.
Yes, they were. They were there for 4 years. That is true. Mm-hmm.
How come you didn't open it as a Democratic Party then?
There's answers for that.
What am I missing?
Data, research.
I'm not saying I know. It's a legitimate question.
It's not a legitimate
Maybe I don't
question.
remember the answer. Maybe my extraordinary producers should be able to help me during the commercial break. But from my understanding,
which is limited,
the same files that were open or being open now,
it's not the same files.
with the 220 pages of documents or whatever it is,
does Google exist?
With various emails, that could have been done when Biden was in office.
But
well, why didn't you do it?
Research,
if it's so important now.
Knowledge matters.
What were the Democrats doing at that particular moment in time?
Oh, my.
This is the kind of stuff that smells.
It doesn't, though.
Because my attitude is just deducing how much they despise Trump is if there was some real bona fide dirt on him, since you went after him with the 34 felony convictions, which essentially was deduced to him paying hush money to Stormy Daniels, a porn star, just so she wouldn't reveal their happenings with one another.
That's not why.
Leading up to the election in 2016.
Oh, my God.
Okay?
God, stupidity is just so dangerous.
If you had something like that you were willing to parade him through the streets with, of course, if you had something on him about Epstein, you'd have let it go earlier to make sure he didn't become the 47th president. That's just my thinking from a logical perspective. But what do I know?
But you don't know lots. You don't know much. You don't know facts and figures. First of all, the reason that Donald Trump had to pay Stormy Daniels all that money, it wasn't because he wanted to hide the fact that he had a toad for a member and that she and he had relations together. The reason he had to pay her that hush money was because he did not want her coming out with the fact that they had this affair, because he thought it would throw the election. It was election fraud. Things that you should know if you're going to be talking about this. The other issue is that the files that were released this week, and again, we're talking about fake wars. The files that were released this week are not the Epstein files that are going to be released as a result of this discharge petition. The files that came out this week, as noted by actual reporters like Julie K. Brown, not downtown Julie Brown, Julie K. Brown, who is a Miami Herald journalist whose investigations led to the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. She talks about very generously the fact that this is a complicated case with a lot of files, so it's easy to confuse she says it's easy to confuse what's what. She says what Stephen doesn't understand is that the emails released on Wednesday are from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. Not the files that the federal government has, the estate. They were obtained from Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers pursuant to a subpoena that was issued by the House Oversight Committee. Those documents are separate from the criminal cases, the case files that were held by the DOJ and that the FBI, that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi promised to release after the election. As for why, she says, Biden and the Democrats didn't release the criminal case files when they were in office, that's because Ghislaine Maxwell's case was still open during the Biden administration. Remember, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and placed in jail and unalived during Donald Trump's administration, not during Joseph Biden's administration. Ghislaine Maxwell, goes on reporter Julie Brown, wasn't convicted until late 2021, and then she appealed her conviction. Generally, she says it's not a good idea to open up your evidence files when a criminal case is ongoing. We also don't know whether the FBI was still investigating other possible suspects who helped Epstein or participated in his crimes. If you're still targeting suspects, you don't want them to know you're zeroing in on them. I don't know why Stephen A. Smith is pulling a Charlemagne by trying to blame the Democrats for what the Republicans have done. So it's important to remind you, as we're talking about fake wars, because we're about to connect all this shit to what's happening in Venezuela, it's important for us to be crystal clear about the fact that this was what the Republicans wanted. Donald Trump ran on the notion that he was going to release the Jeffrey Epstein files. Pamela Bondi, once she was sworn in, said, I've got the Epstein files right on my desk and we're going to release the Klein files right away. And then she and Kash Patel and Don Bongino, who is the FBI deputy director, both of whom came into office riding on a popularist podcast bros energizing bunny situation where they had promised they were going to release the Epstein files as soon as they got into office. Democrats wasn't thinking about no damn Epstein files, although apparently we should have been thinking about the Epstein files. I said we, like we're all in this together as Democrats. The Democratic Party should have been listening and talking about the Epstein files because of what has actually been revealed to be in them. But I want you now to take a listen to Reese Colbert, who explains it really, really well in ways that I think maybe Stephen A. Smith could understand, but because she's a woman and I'm a woman, he doesn't have a legacy of actually listening to us or reading or having factual information. He probably won't. But here's another tell. If any person is sitting in front of a microphone microphone and they're giving you information from a position of power, and they're saying things like, maybe my producers can help me understand it during the commercial break, that is a tell that they did not do any research or don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Because if they knew what they were talking about, you don't need your producers to correct your record during a commercial break. You have an accurate record before you go on air. And then if you fuck up on air, you apologize for it. So again, I don't know why Stephen A. Smith is pulling a Charlemagne on this one, but this is apparently what's happening. Take a listen to our good sister, Reese Colbert, because she had some things to say about this, and she does it in a way that, quite frankly, I am always impressed by. Amina, play the clip.
Stephen A. Smith, I know you fucking lying. You cannot tell me that the best spin that you could come up with for your boy Dirty Donald is that these Epstein files being released is some sort of Democratic witch hunt. I know you fucking lying. The fact of the matter is, it is actually MAGA world that has had a hard-on for these Epstein files released for years. It's actually Trump administration officials that talked about release the files, release the files. Kash Patel, the FBI director, he was talking about releasing the files. Don Bongino, another deputy director in the FBI, talked about releasing the files. Pam Bondi, the current attorney general, invited a whole bunch of right-wing influencers to the White House, waving binders full of fake Epstein files. So the question should really be, why is it that Donald Trump officials have changed their tune from release the files to the files don't exist, there's no client list, to covering up for Donald Trump? That's what the real question should be, not about what Democrats are doing. Because the reality is this: Republicans wanted these files before they realized that there was more damaging information about Donald Trump than anybody else. Elon Musk said that Donald Trump was in the files.
Sure did.
Joe Rogan said release the files. Charlie Kirk said release the files. Every right-wing MAGA influencer said release the files. So don't try to put this on motherfucking Democrats, because your boy, Dirty Donald's funky ass, is all up and through those files. If Jeffrey Epstein's child sex trafficking ass can admit that Donald Trump was dirty, that he was worse in person, and all these things about Donald Trump, then why the fuck can't you?
Questions that should be answered, really, that should not have to be asked, but they are, because we now have people who are doing a lot of heavy lifting, carrying a lot of water for the pedophile protection party. I don't understand why people are going to try to make this the hill that they want to die on, but dying is something we should all think about because of how this may in part be connected to what's happening right now off the coast of Venezuela. Trump's fake wars is what we're talking about. And in the podcast, I also share a video clip by a woman by the name of Monty Mader, who talks about the fact that, quite frankly, nobody in the right wing is actually going to hold Donald Trump accountable because they're all in on pedophilia in ways that she explores. And as a white woman, she's got insights that I just simply do not. And she rips them for a new one. And so, again, you'll hear that in the podcast episode. We just don't have time to do to take care of it today. The reason this all matters is because next week, there's going to be a discharge petition. What has been released this week was just the emails from Jeffrey Epstein's estate, as we have clearly outlined. Next week, there's going to be a vote that was triggered by the swearing in of Representative Adelita Grijalva out of Arizona. Now, Adelita Grijalva was the 218th vote on the discharge petition. The discharge petition is one that basically says once we reach 218, we get to force a vote on whether or not we should release the Epstein files. As a result of the emails that came out on Wednesday, is hella Republicans right now who are like, I'm going to vote for the release of the petition. This is insane, because they don't want to be associated with the pedophile protection party. And even though Donald Trump technically might not be able to run for office again, although I do suspect that if this goes really, really bad for him, he will resign. J.D. Vance will pardon him. J.D. Vance will become the next president. MAGA Mike Johnson, who is the Speaker of the House, will become the vice president according to the order of succession. And then we'll get J.D. Vance, not for one term, but 2 terms if people don't show up to vote. But since J.D. Vance is a part of the party that's basically trying to eradicate your voting rights, good luck with all of this. We're going to have to figure some things out. But basically, once this discharge petition is voted on next week, it will go from the House. And let's assume they vote yes. They say they've got the votes. Let's assume they vote yes, and then send it from the House to the Senate. Then the Senate is going to have to decide, well, the House just sent us this legislation. We now have to debate it. If there are a number of Republicans in the House who are voting for it, it's going to be really difficult for the Senate Republicans to not vote for it. Let's say, best case scenario, the senators decide that they are indeed going to vote to pass this discharge petition onto the White House, because how a bill becomes a law, you pass it in the legislation in the House, you get signed off on the Senate, and then it goes to the president for signature. At that point, Donald Trump is going to have a decision to make. Will he sign the legislation into law that is going to mandate the release of the Epstein files, the actual files with the photographs and the videotapes and all the things things, kind of like the Diddy evidence case, but like massively, massively, massively more? Will he sign that legislation into law, thereby exposing himself and all the other billionaires, including the Peter Thiels, who, as I told you, was in the Epstein files. Deepak Chopra is in the Epstein files. You got Melinda Gates doing video talking about how she and Bill Gates divorced because Bill Gates had this weird friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. It's a whole lot of people in these fucking files. And so Donald Trump's going to have to make a decision. Do I sign the legislation into law to open it up, or do I not sign the legislation into law to open it up? Either way, that's a really bad look. It's a really bad look. So it wasn't a surprise to me when, after earlier this week, we reported on the fact that the UK has decided they're no longer going to be sharing information, military information, top secret information with the United States, because the United States has been weaponizing that information to bomb people in the ocean, innocent people, murdering innocent people in the ocean. And we have to call it murder. They are innocent until proven guilty, but we can't prove them guilty or innocent because, quite frankly, you destroyed all the evidence when you bombed them out the sky. And so as Donald Trump is doing that, we also got word that the level of troop buildup in Venezuela is extraordinary. Extraordinary. I want you, actually, we don't even have time to play this clip, but there is a clip that you'll hear in the podcast where CBS News is reporting that they have been moving aircraft carriers into the coast of Venezuela. They have been sending planes. They have been sending troops. They are preparing for something, either the greatest level of military exercise that our nation has known since the Iraq War, or they're just bored, or these motherfuckers is planning to go to war. Okay, now you don't have to take my word for it. I already played for you all earlier this week a clip from President Petro out of Colombia, where he clearly outlines that the Americans are going to go to war with Venezuela to distract the American people from the Epstein files. They're going to use this war to make sure that the Americans don't pay attention to the Epstein files because they are very embarrassed about what's in the Epstein files. So I'm not the only one who's like, wait a minute. Wouldn't it be weird if America had to go to war before the discharge petition made its way all the way from the House to the Senate up onto the president's desk? Wouldn't it be weird if we were at war while that was happening? Because while we're at war, that shit ain't gonna happen. So I don't know. As I mentioned earlier this morning, Lamont King and Dr. Greg Carr had a friendly wager, and they were wagering whether or not there was going to be any militarized action this weekend. I don't know if there's going to be anything happening this weekend, but I firmly do. It's going to be hard to convince me that there will not be an Epstein file war started before the holiday season. I'm just saying. But because we now have a demonstrated history of the lengths to which this administration will go to lie about things, to do fake ass shit, to justify military incursions here in these United States. And Portland, Oregon is white as fuck. I mean, there are black people there, but it's a hella white state. It's one of the whitest states in the union. I think Oregon is the state that got its start by having in its constitution that black people couldn't be there. Like, it's hella white. I don't know what y'all racial relationships are right now, but y'all have a very racist history, considering y'all ain't even had slavery in Oregon. To be that anti-black is really doing a lot. But if they're willing to manufacture evidence, if they're willing to manufacture stories about the levels of resistance that people are using as against ICE, and they're willing to use information from protests that started and ended years ago to justify sending in federal troops into white-ass states like Portland, Oregon, why on earth would it be a stretch for them to do something similar to invade a nation to avoid being outed as the party of pedophile protectors? Now, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I do know that y'all's the head of war, Pete, his own mama said he's trash Hegseth. He has decided that he's purging the military of all the blacks. He's purging the military of the gays, of the Latinos. He's purging the military of the women. He's got a military that if it's following the policies and procedures as he is directing them, this military is going to be largely white male and white male only, from the rooter to the tutor, which means it's the white boys who's going to be going to war to make sure that we don't release the Epstein files. If all of this happens, and this is all supposition, we don't know. We just know that these people are lying ass liars who lies. I'm just saying, white boys, is this MAGA? Are you great again? And again, we don't have time to play this clip here. Urban View, I will play it for you on the other side of the commercial break. But Gary Chambers, in a phenomenal video, really does a great job of explaining to poor white people that you are the field hands. We know you've been told you was the overseer. We know that on plantation law, you were led to believe that having a system of free labor where Africans were forced to work for nothing was okay for you, even though you absolutely needed to be paid for work. But because your wealthy white cousins despise your poor white asses, they decided that they were going to use a foolish trick called racism to convince you to believe that it was going to be okay to support a system of free labor that was in direct competition to your needs as a poor white person who needed to get paid for your labor, but at least you weren't black. That whole system known as racism that y'all bought hook, line, and sinker that you're still operating with today, which is why you ain't got no health care, you ain't got no dental care, your teeth falling out your mouth, but you talking about MAGA and DEI. You're the field hands, friend. You're the soldier boys who are going to be going to war to protect your pet. Whoo, Jesus, Mother, Father, God. He tied my bow tie. I'm arriving in a Hyundai. It's just so much. It's just so much. Makes you realize that perhaps the real problem with all of this is you're a bunch of fools who unfortunately have been willful participants in your own snookering. You've been willful participants in destroying access to equity for everybody else. And so now, who's left to fight to defend America? USA, USA, you are the ones who are going to war. If this all happens the way it looks to be happening, I don't know. The president of Colombia seems to think this is where things are going. Ask him. I mean, you might want to learn a little Spanish. I know how y'all feel about learning to speak the language of other people, so it might not work out so well for you, but we're going to leave it there for now. On the other side of the commercial break, Urban View, I will take your calls at 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK. Lots to figure out. I hope we don't go to war. Lord knows I don't want to go to war. I think it would be a terrible thing to go to war because there's no reason to be going to war, but there was also no reason to invade Portland, Oregon. There was also no reason for you to be bombing innocent people out of the sky, claiming they're narco traffickers in violation of all the policies and procedures for determining who is an actual narco trafficker. The math ain't math